Good morning, everyone, and to members of the public and staff and anyone who's online. Just a reminder to everyone, this has been recorded and will be live online. So Sarah, are you leading this off, hopefully?
We'll just start with our karakia.
Is your microphone working that in?
That's just restarting, but I don't know.
Just for the record, we just wish to acknowledge Kevin's apology. He's got another commitment, Councillor Taylor, and won't be in the chamber this morning.
And Councillor Delatour is also an apology today.
Yeah.
Sarah, are you ready to start?
Yes, morena koutou, and apologies for the technological issues this morning, but we got there. It's a bit of an unusual way to be presenting at the table, but that's okay. Now, look, we obviously last week we kicked off the financial strategy workshops with number one. So we'll quickly recap where we got to last workshop, and then we're going to do a deep dive into our next two parts. I suspect I won't be as long this week if we spend a little bit less time on that upfront stuff and, just the more time in that debt and security for borrowing space, so then we can get on with the level of service workshops, which I know you all desperately want to have discussions about. And Paul Kendall, who's running the show, is sitting there voiceless, but that's okay. She can pass things through me. Perfect. Next. Oh no, other way. One more. Yeah, so just a recap from last week. Obviously the financial strategy is a specific legislative document, so it outlines the financial vision for 10 years. It's a very high level document because a lot of the fundamental policies that surround it are kind of separate, as well as the fact that it should be a good reflection of your long-term plan and the many pages of documentation behind that. But it does give really key areas for governance, monitoring and oversight, and if done well, hopefully it tells a good story to the community about where our financial priorities are. And again, just a plug for the last one, which is linked there, so if you have a look, it gives you a good idea of what our financial priorities were last time. But yes, on that, it is a very different environment this time. So those were the key parts which we discussed last time. I did have one follow-up question to go away with, which was the inclusion of te tiriti. Now, I did have a look around, and by me I mean AI, and just had a double check on my thinking. And I think Julie did reference last time the te tiriti is actually foundational. It's in the long-term plan up front. So that covers the complete, everything that sits around that. So, the long-term plan, financial strategy is just a small part. We've got lots of interrelated parts. But the te tiriti inclusion up front is positioned as foundational in the overarching foundation of all of the things that sit under it. So the financial strategy is more that legislative document with specific finance purpose. So the things that we talk about are your constraints, your limits, your revenue flows, debt funding choices and stuff like that. So I'm happy to have a further conversation, but I know when I talk to Kendall about that, some of that upfront te tiriti references will be brought back to this table as to how we want to frame that as well. So other than that, yeah, those are kind of just as presented last week. Now, moving on to debt now. Obviously, debt is a big part of the financial strategy. It is really key to intergenerational equity concepts. It's always been, other than depreciation funding, really your key lever for spreading the cost of use of assets to the right ratepayer. You know, without using debt for a lot of that stuff, you would get people who weren't using that asset paying for it. So for example, if we build an asset that's got a life of 40 years, the people who are using it now would pay for it rather than the people who will use it over that 40 years. So again, it's been a really key foundational principle to local government, given we want to make sure the right ratepayers are paying for the assets. However, things are slightly changing, which I will talk about today. The main drivers of increased debts are increased level of service. So you think anything that we do that's above the, you know, what we've got there at the moment. So a good example is if we've got an intersection at the moment and we turn that into a roundabout, you know, those kind of increased levels of service, they're often linked to debt because it's more than what we've got at the moment. Or if we build a new, a new community asset, those are increased level of service. So those are big drivers of debt because they haven't been funded elsewhere, like through renewals. We've got legislative requirements. So another example, it is almost a level of service conversation too. So where you're putting in new treatment plants or things like protozoa barriers and stuff that is required from a legislative perspective, those are increased level of service too, and often drives you know, some of that debt as well. And then we've got renewal gaps. So if done right, depreciation should fund renewals, but in times of increased inflation and particularly around infrastructure construction, sometimes we have to use debt to fund that renewal gap as well. Other than that, provisioning for growth is a big one. Often a lot of the growth work needs to be done up front, or a district grows a lot faster than was expected and you need assets a lot earlier. And in that case as well, those are kind of the key drivers of debt in local government. It is also inherently linked to some of the other financial strategy items other than level of service, which I've kind of already talked about. You know, depreciation funding, insurance, property and asset rationalisation and unexpected events. Those are all things that are interlinked with your debt because depending on how you do those things, it can have an impact. So, for example, if we decided not to insure specific assets and then something happened, obviously we'll be funding that through debt. So, yeah, those are kind of key linked principles. And then just wanted to mention, so we obviously have financial prudence concept, and there's legislation around financial prudence, and the appropriate management is really important for a lot of these metrics. So there is an inherent link as well to some of that legislation around councils, you know, being prudent with ratepayer money. So, and then just to mention, so we're currently got an AA credit rating. So this is a key part of our financial strategy because any decrease in credit rating from AA. So if we went into the A, you know, even an A+, that would cost us increased interest costs. So that's really key to our financial strategy, is maintaining that credit rating. Now, just wanted to jump into, let's revisit the previous LTP. Oops, sorry. My son got me this drink container. It's very new. spilled everywhere. Yes. Now, the last long-term plan, we obviously had a strategy that kept debt well within councils, not only council's self-imposed debt limit, but the local government funding agency covenant. So we did increase last long-term plan our debt affordability from 225% of revenue to 250%. Now that wasn't about because we had challenges with our debt limit, but that was in relation to recognising that growth has an impact on debt. It actually it wouldn't be inappropriate for council's debt to increase in the current high growth environment that we've been in. So the LGFA covenant is 280% at the moment. However, there is a special covenant available for high growth councils, which takes special application of 350%. So again, well below what our lenders will lend us. But recognising that debt's always been a really important concept to ratepayers, so ensuring that we are living within our means is important. So, so that's the last long-term plan. Now, you can see we've got both net and gross debt on there. That is important because our lenders actually, their covenant's based on net debt. However, we are always measuring gross debt. So net debt is debt after liquid assets, so any cash or things that can be turned into cash quickly. So that's kind of the last long-term plan.
Through the chair, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that after 2030, it's sort of forecast that debt will be reducing. So is that, what's the story behind that?
Yeah, no, it's actually not so much that debt will be reducing. So if you can see our proposed, well, it does reduce, the green line, the proposed debt, but it's actually that there was a couple of projects in the middle there that peaked our debt, and in particular, and Jeanette's probably best to say, I can't remember which ones. I have a feeling, there she is. I have a feeling there were a couple of projects, it might be the second bridge, The second bridge. There was a couple of growth projects up that we would be contributing to up front outside of development levies that drove that up, but just a temporary peak while it came back down.
No, okay, I just wonder by 2030, will we come up with some other big projects and it will just keep ramping up? I mean, that's what we've got in the long-term plan now. I'm just, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think if you remember some of those financial prudence graphs from the last long-term plan, we talked about how, particularly in that infrastructure space and the legislative space, that we were doing a lot of work up front, and so we reprioritised some of that infrastructure work. I know around waters and some of our treatment plant stuff, we reprioritised that up front, but then reduced what our spend was at the end of the long-term plan because we no longer needed that. So some of that's to do with meeting legislative requirements. So then again, I think that little lump in there is actually the bridge.
Yeah, I'm just being cynical, if you like, but if the long-term plans, the last long-term plans are anything to go by, I would kind of expect that green line to keep on going rather than drop off.
Yeah.
Just because of we don't know what we don't know, and we'll think up something else to spend it on. That's
Yeah,
that's
we don't know what we don't know. But actually, I will talk about how the environment has changed and where I would propose we do look at changing things. But like I said, if you look at those financial strategies, there was a lot of work up front. While we can't control what legislation will be, enacted on us, we also did recognise that there was a lot of work, particularly in those water plants, to get our plants up to compliance standard. And again, I keep making a habit of talking about water, and Tony might have comment around that.
Councillor Leonard, do you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, I do. Sarah, I understand where you're coming from with the debt funding and things like that. what I'm trying to get my head around is with these projects, so we're making the capital expenditure, but then the impact of that on our operating expenditure, sort of in the long term with depreciation, sorry, something just dropped there. Making these decisions and then understanding the impact that they're going to have on rates separate to the debt.
Yeah,
Is there any way that we can get insights into that?
yeah, so totally agreed. And I will be talking a bit later about how debt is particularly challenging to manage in a rates capped environment, and coming to your point around level of service in particular, it has such a driver on operating costs as well. So in a rates capped environment, that level of service work is really challenging, and it will be a key focus of this LTP and financial strategy, because we can't afford big bumps in our rates when we're trying to manage just inflation, right? Level of service projects will become increasingly challenging, and as a result, I imagine our debt will naturally go down if we don't do anything to also bring it down from other aspects that we've already talked about. But no, totally agreed, Councillor Len, it's really important when Council makes those decisions and it's aware of OPEX costs as well.
Thank you.
Perfect. Now, this debt servicing benchmark is an important one. So there's two parts to debt and two benchmarks that council need to manage in relation to debt. One is obviously the amount of debt to our revenue, so the affordability from that perspective, but the other thing is the affordability to ratepayers. So historically, because this is set by central government, this benchmark, it's one that's imposed on us. So low to medium growth council or no growth council, the benchmark's actually 10%. Now, in the last long-term plan, given our population projections, we were able to move to 15%. Now, one of the things I had in the financial strategy last time was the risk that if our growth didn't occur, that we would be back down to the 10% limit. And if you see up front, there were challenges, particularly around that affordability for our ratepayer. Now, we've done a lot of work, and that's reflected actually in those graphs in relation to our cost of capital. So that's been a really key part of the financial strategy to get our cost of capital lower, and our Treasury Advisor along with our finance team have been working really hard on that, for which has been successful. And in fact, when Jeanette brings the forecast to you, you'll see we've actually achieved even better than those outcomes. However, again, from a long-term perspective, those fluctuations in debt costs are challenging to manage, and there is always the risk that we go back to the 10% benchmark as well, from a financial prudence perspective. So. That. Now, what's different this time? Now, this is a big one, and I'm working on a number of assumptions here, but managing debt under a rates capped environment is extremely challenging. Those fluctuations in costs of capital, it's really hard to manage from a level of service perspective. So if you all of a sudden have an increase of $1 or $2 million and then have to cut $1 or $2 million out of your OPEX cost from a year-to-year perspective, that is really challenging. So managing debt in a rates capped environment when you've got a firm cap is really hard, because the fluctuation in costs then either brings you closer or further away from that cap. So really challenging to manage all the other operating costs that we have, a lot of which are also fixed. So yeah, that becomes really challenging to manage. And then, of course, we've got development levies legislation. So development levies are coming in, and I think we have to adopt the new system by 2030, I think, Aidan, 2030? Yeah, 2030. And we may wish to adopt that earlier. However, we haven't done a lot of modelling around what that will look like, because we're still working through the legislation, we're still awaiting some detail, as well as the fact we obviously haven't got our capital program for the long-term plan. We need to do a bit of work on how that will impact debt. So just a note there really that the development levies change could have an impact on debt either way. And then our growth assumptions. So at the moment we do our own growth modelling, the Statistics New Zealand modelling, and I know the team have already talked to you about this, so I won't go into too much detail, but historically we used Statistics New Zealand. It never really worked for Taupō. We often got growth that far exceeded the models, so we have done our own model with peer review of that. However, there is a chance that rates caps will be linked to a different model, which is potentially Statistics New Zealand. So if your revenue's capped here and your project assumptions are based on the growth we've projected, we're going to get a little bit of a mismatch in debt and revenue. So we probably need to rethink that growth assumption depending on what the rates cap result is, because there's a chance that we'll be capped to a lower level of growth, but be planning our projects on that higher level, and that obviously has an impact on debt. So we just have to keep an eye on that, really. It's more of a note than anything. And as I talked about, stability of interest rate, councils have always worked on, well, generally councils have always worked on lowest costs overall. So when thinking about costs of capital, we are really lucky as a sector. We've got Local Government Funding Agency, which is AA plus rated, higher than all of the banks in New Zealand, same as central government. Now we get really good rates. Our GFA have been very successful in keeping our interest costs comparatively low. So we've been fortunate to reap that. However, local government in general haven't done a very good job of, that's probably not the right way to put it, but we've kept our debt at a lowest cost overall, which made sense in the environment we're working in. However, going to a rates cap environment, we probably want to favour or move that a little bit towards a higher cost, but higher stability. And then level of service projects, as we already talked about, are challenging. Councillor Leonard actually explained that very well, not just because of debt, but because of the impact on rates. And generally, we don't just build assets and they have no associated OPEX costs. Almost all projects have associated OPEX costs. And when you're in a rates cap environment, that means if you're putting in a level of service project, what else are you going to turn off, which is challenging. So, look, it's likely to involve managing those level of service projects, which will naturally bring down debt. However, we also it's likely to be quite desirable to council to manage debt down over time using other levers. So asset rationalisation is a really good place to start to manage your debt down. Again, I think there'll be a mixture of things. In the short term, we probably have to look at some stability, because we're not going to reduce our debt next year, right? So we've got to look at some of that longer term stability, but then a strategy of managing that debt down over time.
Sarah, can I just check in? I'm trying to catch up. Trying to understand the impacts on people's rates bills when we're putting that, I think it's the slide back. I know I'm catching up. But if we were to go closer to the 10%, what would that actually do to the rates bill?
Yeah, so at the moment, we're still under benchmark, so there wouldn't be any changes to rates bill. There's just risk in case we had market changes that we would exceed the benchmark, and that's not one that council sets, that's one that's imposed by council. We've done a really good job bringing that debt down, but we are on the alternate cycle in the market. So again, probably just recognising that managing that debt is really important, because there's the potential that we may be back down at that 10%, and we're at, I think it was 6 point, if you go back, Kendall?
Yeah, it's 6.9.
6.9. So it's not like we've got a heap of room in that debt servicing and the cost to ratepayers. particularly at the front end, we are coming down. But if we put big projects in, I guess that's where you would get a lot closer to that benchmark, and that benchmark's one of the financial prudence regulations.
Trying to work out though, like, why can't we go to the 10? Is there actually going to be an impact on the rates bill for individual homeowners? What is the on the ground kind of, what does that look like?
Yep, so if you go to the 10, that you'd be right at what financial prudence concepts recognise as maximum affordability. So yep, you could go the 10, but given the fluctuating market, it's risky to be in that high end if you want to ensure you are acting financially prudently, right? Because of the fluctuations. So
we're keeping it lower to absorb the increase in interest on those debts. Is that right? Yeah,
because this is a cost. So this is interest cost rather than the debt amount. So yeah, so there's two parts of it. So it wouldn't have an impact unless you are proposing more projects or more debt to then increase those. But again, it's not like if it comes back to at the moment we've got quite a gap there. But if it came back to 10, we'd be a little bit tighter from an affordability perspective. And again, that's a prudence concept. So that's what we get told, and the legislation is a prudent amount of borrowing costs.
So then when it comes to trying to keep close to that 10, what is a safe, like if we were to have to fund extra things, what is that magical number that we could happily sit with, and why?
Yeah, it's not so much a magical number, and remembering it is a benchmark. There's been lots of prudence benchmarks that have been breached over the years, and I'm not talking about this council in particular, but in the sector. But it just is a concept that, when considering the costs to ratepayers, you don't really want to be exceeding or getting close to that number that's considered prudent, because that means ratepayer carrying, in their rates is quite a percentage of debt. Debt repayment. So it's not. There's no magical number. It's just about I guess being mindful that that's where what legislation says is a prudent number. You could go right up to that if you wanted to, but there's just risk there, and we would discuss that with you.
I guess what Councillor Foreman was asking was, if you were at 8%, what effect would that have on the rates? Yeah, so if the next one says 6.9 increase the rates 8%, that would put another actually would put another 1.1% on revenue, for which our rates are about 50% ish. Jeanette, 60% might be a bit higher now. Jeanette's frowning. Our rates is a percentage of revenue, so that's revenue overall. So it might put another 60%. Might put another 2 or 3% on rates. Yeah, so it's quite a lot. So yeah, that's why yeah. I think if you remember from my numbers I did last week, a 1% increase in interest was about 1% on rates. Righto. So so asset rationalisation is likely to be kind of one of the levers we can use to manage our debt down, particularly in relation to rates caps, to avoid a little bit of that fluctuation. But those kind of decisions need to be made, and I know you've got the strategic property item to talk about today, but those sort of decisions need to be made in light of, hey, what assets does council think are able to be rationalised to pay down debt? So again, there's quite a lot involved in considering that. And then coming into this long-term plan, and I know last long-term plan we discussed this briefly, but we have quite short loan terms comparatively.
And there is the ability to push loan terms out. However, it'd have the opposite effect of what I've just told you, as in it would increase debt, but also increase affordability to ratepayers. So it would spread that debt over time. So I always thought I would be coming into this long-term plan suggesting moving those out. However, in a rates cap environment, it would then be challenging because it would put more onto debt because it would spread over a longer period. So we've got assets that we fund through depreciation that are 50 to 80 years of life. Our maximum loan term, and Jeanette's going to correct me if I'm wrong, is about 20 years, 25. Into 25. So our maximum loan term is 25 from a cost perspective, and when you're looking at 50 to 80-year assets, there's a potential you could move those out. There still may be the possibility to do that from a water's perspective, given they're excluded from rates cap, but we need to talk to the regulator, given in our water service delivery plan we did not forecast moving those out, but I know a lot of the water service entities certainly have longer loan terms than what we've got, and that just does help keep things affordable for our ratepayers or water customers as they are in that water perspective. So yeah, there's a little bit we could do in that loan term space, but again, given we're coming into the rates cap, probably not ideal from a council perspective.
Another question. The loan terms, do we ever split them and like you would a house and put some on a shorter and some on a longer?
Yeah, so that's externally. So sorry, I'm talking about internal loan terms, which is funding and then how quick we pay it off. Externally, we manage under the Treasury policy, so we have to have a certain amount of cover. And generally speaking, we do that through a lot of swaps and rather than loan term, because it's so easy to get funding from the local government funding agency. And I know they have raised concerns that councils in general borrow quite short, but we do lever other tools such as swaps and stuff to ensure appropriate cover. So you never want a high percentage of your loans to come up at once, so you've got to spread that cover to ensure, again, it's to do with stability and again some of those financial prudence concepts, but that's all set through the Treasury management policy, and you guys set that on advice from our Treasury advisor. So sorry, and I know it's confusing. Local government funding is a little bit of a dark art, but the loan terms I'm talking about is internally, and that's how much it costs, because you can imagine we've got thousands of projects over the years, and then we spread the loan term and the loan repayments, but that's internally, and then what we borrow externally doesn't necessarily reflect that, because local government has reserves and other things that feed into your overall debt profile. So yeah, that's kind of as easily as I can explain it without getting into too much detail. But yeah. And then the regulated environment, as I said, with waters and other things, likely regulatory influence. So one of the things regulators can influence, obviously, is the appropriateness of how you're spreading your debt and who's paying for your assets. So I expect the regulators will have influence there. I'm not 100% whether Commerce Commission, who are kind of getting up to speed with waters, will input this long-term plan, but certainly they have the powers to. So, and then depreciation funding concepts might be replaced now. I'll put this here with a question mark, and I know the sector through Taupō have talked about how does depreciation funding work in the context of a rates cap. So if you have a massive infrastructure inflation on construction, and that goes up massively and it's above the 2 to 4%, then which legislation comes first? So I know that was the feedback Taupō provided to central government in their submission on rates caps, but it looks like we're going to have two opposing pieces of legislation, so it'll be interested to see if depreciation funding concepts are replaced, or if we have advice on which one comes first. So is it the rates cap that's more important, or is it depreciation funding? So I suspect the depreciation funding will be the one that is sacrificed here. And then after all of that, hey, I've probably been a little bit negative. We're in a really good position. We've got a lot of levers that aren't available to every council. We've got obviously a really healthy supply of land which can be developed. We've got healthy asset base. We've, I think we've made really good investment decisions in the past, and our budget's balanced. I know not every council's in this position, so we're starting at a good position to be able to have a look and shape this financial strategy in a way that is a lot more flexible than what other councils are going to be able to do. Again, the TR Investment Fund, there's a lot of fortunate things that we have on our side. So just wanted to make sure I wasn't all doom and gloom, but it is a different environment. And I do suspect there will be changes.
Through the chair, I'll just ask a question. I've heard it said that many councils in New Zealand could do better if they more seriously considered selling off a lot of its assets. We have lots of spare land, that sort of thing. I mean, do we take that very seriously?
Yeah, so as you're aware, we do quite a bit in this space already. What the last long-term plan strategy said was that for the asset sales that we were doing, so you think about the land development, we were putting that back into the strategic property reserve to ensure no degradation of assets, right? So everyone can sell assets to pay debt down. It's just whether council want to keep the current level of assets or whether they are comfortable to say, actually, we can rationalise ones we don't need anymore. And that is a decision of council. If you have a look at our counterparts overseas, asset rationalisation and level of service and all of those concepts were used to reduce debt. So debt is much lower in New South Wales than it is here.
Councillor Leonard, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, John. I'm not sure if this is the right point or time, Sarah, but what you've just said has brought it to mind. So we have a number of assets, and we see some councils out there that have invested those assets to create an income to then reduce rates. And have we explored, or can we explore that sort of a concept? So one example that comes to mind is the Port of Tauranga and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and the income that they can earn there. You know, do we have any capacity as a council to consider borrowing to create an asset that would then create an income for the district, which then would in the future have a positive effect on rates?
So alternate streams of revenue have always been front of mind. It's really challenging to get, I understand the concept and I understand the question, but it is quite hard to get those across from a community perspective because it is a little bit outside of what council do. I think development and providing, land and lots for the district aligns with our growth responsibilities and our planning responsibilities, but outside of that there is a little bit of a fine line where I know it's challenging for councils, and a lot of those things you're talking about are quite historic arrangements where councils haven't necessarily bought those shares to create a revenue. It's been part of what they've done as a business. So, I guess all I'm saying is I think the question from ratepayers would be, why don't you reduce our rates? And that's kind of the challenge. But, totally hear what you say. We've got a lot of land absolutely. Could we develop houses and keep them, for instance, and have a revenue? Could we develop commercial properties and lease them out? You could, but that's not really council's core service, and I think that's why we're kind of aligning it with debt.
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that answer. Thanks, Sarah.
Oh, yeah, through the chair, I was just going to follow up what you said before about New South Wales. Are you saying asset rationalisation was quite a low? I know that I think they had other stuff. I think you mentioned other stuff like federal support and all that sort of stuff as well. But asset rationalisation, as in, if we did a bit more of that around here, say, what do you think that would look like?
So those are the conversations that we might have under the strategic property. And I can see the poster behind you, the conversations that are up next. But certainly at the moment, like I said, we use council's strategic property to ensure that our strategic property balance does not decline. However, if it's a conscious council decision to trade some of that strategic property we don't need for debt to reduce your debt levels, that's an appropriate decision for council to make.
So just what's a layperson's practical example of let's sell X? What would the X be?
Yes, I'll just use EUL as an example. So EUL, we've got 120 hectares there. If we continue to develop that and make profit as we've proven ourselves to be successful at, then we could pay down debt. So there will be a paper coming to you in March proposing to pay down some debt from our commercial development on Crown Road instead of reinvesting that into the asset fund or the reserve. But we could essentially use development proceeds to pay down debt rather than go into a reserve to ensure our asset value doesn't decrease because we are making profit. But yeah, so sorry, coming back to you, that was actually a two-part question. New South Wales, anecdotally, there was a lot of rationalisation of assets, not only actually sales, but there were a lot of community groups that were given assets as well from a management perspective and an ongoing operational perspective to give away council assets that were costing council money. So there were, I think, again, anecdotally, because there's no one source of evidence here, I think the combination of level of service projects being unfavourable in a rates cap environment, along with asset rationalisation, had reduced their debt, but certainly had proven successful given, I think it was $27 million average debt at New South Wales councils, which are on average bigger than New Zealand councils. $27 million, which is quite substantially different to our debt.
Well, we're close to 200, aren't we? So yeah. What are some examples? Can you think of an example? What were they giving away? They weren't giving away the library, I suppose. But I mean, community buildings or.
Yeah, I think the examples that I heard about were things like parks, things like gardens. So yeah, there were lots of community groups that took over council assets, and again, from an operational perspective, over time, it's just become challenging for council to manage level of service.
Also giving away reserves. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
When you say giving away reserves, they're giving away the management of it or the asset?
Both.
One assumes for money it was exchanged.
Oh, look, there were many examples that we were given when Jeanette and I were over there about how they manage asset rationalisation. Look, probably to put it in context, I know they get a lot of state and federal grant funding for level of service projects. What we heard from some people was that they didn't want the money because of the ongoing operating costs. So everything came back to that operating cost focus under a rates cap. And then to Councillor Campbell's point, debt become really challenging to manage, and which is kind of what I've reflected, that fluctuation of interest costs becomes really challenging when you're trying to manage a level of service that you've agreed on with the community.
Understood.
Now the next item in the financial strategy is security for borrowing. This is probably a little bit, in my mind, straightforward. So council secures borrowing against rates income. Now there's a debenture trust deed and legislation which ensures that lenders have a charge over rates income. Now that's no different to what happens in the commercial sector, and I know there have been challenges about that over time and how it works, and a bit of misunderstanding out there. But that is the normal environment provided for under legislation, and there's nothing really we can do about that unless you want to stop lending completely. And then coming to security over specific assets. So this is where council will actually put assets up as security for lending. It doesn't happen all that often, but where it does, this is the place where we list where that is appropriate, and in my mind that hasn't really changed. And then there's a little bit further detail in the Treasury Management Policy again, probably just referencing that link because lending in particular is provided for under the Treasury Management Policy. So that's kind of copied from the last long-term plan, and if Kendall, if you skip to the next one. So fundamentally, look, I think not a lot's changed in that respect. Lenders still will require security over revenue going forward, and the asset security conditions remain appropriate. However, there is a possibility we might want to develop a little bit more detail around rate securing on waters borrowing, particularly given the financial separation, and just making it really clear what we are and aren't doing in that water space, because fundamentally the legislation still doesn't allow for waters revenue to be secured over borrowing. It allows for rates, so it's we probably just need to discuss that link a little bit more, particularly in light of changes from waters reforms. So maybe a little bit more put in there. And then that was me, so hopefully I did a better job of sticking to my time this week.
Are there any further questions?
Oh, there it is.
All right, everyone, here we are again. We've got another exciting activity. We've got 4 new activity areas to discuss today. They're good ones. You'll be excited. We've got pools, housing for the elderly, which came up last time, so primed for that. Strategic property, which Sarah's touched on as well, so that should be good. And waste and environmental management. We're broadly going to do the same process as last time, which I'm sure you remember. For those online, I've actually emailed you. If you have a look, hopefully in your emails you'll get an email from me, copies of the posters, so you can put your own digital red dots wherever you like, and you can add in your comments and feedback, and we'll try and bring that in. If not through today's workshop, we'll add it in at the end, so that's part of the picture as well. So sorry we didn't have that for you last time, but hopefully that works this time, and you can email it back to me. We did talk about smaller groups. I think you've managed that yourselves. Thank you. Pretty much we'll just get into it. What do we have first? First we've got strategic property. We'll have these 4 head over to strategic property, and at the back we've got pools, which is the Mayor, Stephen and Rachel. All right. We've got an hour to do the 4, so pretty much the same time frames as last time. We'll see how we go. If there's time at the end, we might do a wrap-up session, looking at also where we got to last week as well. That's it. All right. Team.
Does everyone want to take their seats again? Councillors? Who are we missing? Why? No. We just carry on. They're not here. Okay, we'll carry on analysing the work we've done. Open, Kylie, you're back online.
Yep, here, John, thanks.
Thanks very much.
Yes, I'm here, John. Thank you. I'm still making my way through those things that you sent through, Aidan, and I just want to say I really appreciate you sending those through this time. It's quite cool to be able to do it online, so I appreciate that.
Thanks, Hope.
Okay, so same format as last time. We'll have a quick look at what sort of the initial direction is according to what's on the sheets, and then a bit of a group discussion, see if we can formalise any of that direction. I've gone through and I've typed up what we got last time, and the feedback and comments I was going to say have been very useful. One thing we have missed though is at the bottom of the sheets that were handed out was some service level options that staff had put forward as potential areas that we could explore. A lot of the feedback was on different matters and didn't necessarily cover those off. So as part of our group discussion, we might just go through those one by one and see if there is sort of consensus on yes, yes, no type thing. So that's the only thing I'm going to add. Otherwise, we'll start with general discussion. Let's do pools first, where the view seems to be community is highly satisfied, and there's a range of importance, but most reasonably important for the community, and the community is pretty happy with the services we provide. We've got some pretty good pools. But on the other side, there seems to be a bit of a move towards doing a bit of a service level review. So it'd be good to understand what the thinking is behind that, what particular areas you'd like to review. And again, there are some options that the staff put forward that I'll be testing as well. Over to councillors for discussion.
Oh, Hope, you got a question?
Yes, thank you, John. So just with the polls there, were we specifically doing, the Taupō polls, or were we doing the individual community polls? I did mine based on the Magikino polls.
It's all the pools together, but in the service level options, there were some specific areas for particular pools. So both, yeah, individual and all.
Right, okay. Well, just for some feedback for mine, the polls matter a lot to our community, but there are still improvements that they would like to see.
Yep.
Duncan?
Yeah, just through the chair. Yeah, about the pool, just talking about focusing on AC baths in particular. I mean, I used to be a regular user of that, and it really is a premium facility. And compared to pools I've experienced in, say, larger cities, it's very much underutilised compared to what it could be. And I reckon, I mean, I would like to see the opening hours extended, especially at weekends and public holidays. Actually, I think because that could be a place a lot of people head to. I think from memory, I think the closing time is only 7 o'clock on the weekends. Yeah, I think that's a bit disappointing, and I know it's related to staffing. I would like to see a way around that, a magical way of getting extra staff to keep one of our premium facilities open longer. And just on that topic of the pools, we had a brief discussion about the safety accreditation, which, I mean, not every public pool is safety accredited. It sounds important, and it is, but if we dropped that, that would save a nominal amount, actually. And I'm not convinced it would absolutely reduce our chances of anyone drowning, but anyway, we're not talking about a huge chunk out of the budget, so I'll leave that.
Through the chair. Thank you. Thank you very much for this, Aidan. First of all, just a massive compliment to the staff in the swimming pools. The fact that the very unfortunate fatalities we've had over the years have been due to medical events, and nothing else is a real credit to our staff. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I do sort of stand in support, though, of, and I've been advocating this for at least the last 10 years, well before I was on council, for free swimming pools in Turangi, and the suggestion that you're talking about a targeted rate, I would be very comfortable with that. The Turangi people are a long distance from the lake. We do not sit on the lake, unlike Taupō, and we have a very fast-flowing and relatively dangerous river running through our town, which our children are fabulous in negotiating, no doubt about that, but I really would like to see them free. We also have 3 schools in the area which do not have swimming pools, 4 schools. If you take in Kurita, 4 schools in the district that don't have swimming, which is sort of quite unusual in New Zealand, because actually in past years schools all had swimming pools, so we need to be using that pool as much as we possibly can. And I would also like to suggest to staff that they go out and seek sponsorship. We had sponsorship for the Turangi pool from Genesis for quite some time, and you know, I wouldn't have any problem with naming rights if people are looking to sponsor our pools. We have gone back to the turtle pools, but I think if it meant that we were going to get free pools and we were going to have a good level of sponsorship, I don't think anybody would have any difficulty with naming rights. I certainly wouldn't have a problem with that, but it's really, really important to support our children. Swimming just does so much for children, and it's a safe environment for them. And we just need to think about what we can do for the children in Turangi. There's limited options, unlike Taupō children, and we are 50 kilometres away from the centre of the world up here.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I reflected on the workshop last week, and I thought, well, gosh, we really didn't offer much in the way of direction for staff, other than we love what you do, we love our facilities, we want to keep doing what we're doing. But the reality is we have to make cuts. We have to find somewhere. So we're going to have to start having some tough conversations, and one of those might actually be that under 5s may remain at free, but perhaps the parents don't get in for free. There might be other ways that we can look at bringing in a bit of extra income. What we need to remember is that the cost of running those pools is 70% rate funded and 30% user pays currently, approximately. It costs $30 as soon as somebody walks in the door. In fact, Aidan just pointed out it's $30 regardless of who walks in the door, because that's the cost of maintaining the pools. So we are going to have to look at doing things differently, and it's all well and good to say open for longer and all of these wonderful things, but at the end of the day, we might not be able to afford that. So unfortunately, we are going to have to look at cutting levels of service, and it might just be that parents of 5-year-olds have to pay, for instance. $12 entry is not expensive, given it costs about $30 every time somebody, on average, every time somebody walks in the door. I think we need to go out and engage with our community about whether they're happy that 70% of that is coming out of their rates, and perhaps user pays needs to be looked at a little bit more closely.
Councillor Foreman.
Kia ora, just want to check. These sessions are just our initial kind of feelings, and we get to have another go at this when we have a look, and that's where I thought we would be having the nitty-gritty conversations on, is this right? Yeah?
Yeah, so we do want to shape and firm up direction as much as we can as we go. Okay. There will be a wrap-up session at the end where we look overall across everything. Now that we've looked at everything, have we identified enough? Are these the right ones? So there'll be some debate there. We'll try and get as firm a direction as we can there. as much agreement as we can there, and then it will come back to council in a formal paper to sign off, and there'll be debate, and that'll be a final
But
opportunity.
as a council, we get to debate these again?
Yes. Yep.
Before
There'll be a
we-
wrap-up session where we look at them all
Okay.
again and try and firm direction, and then a council debate to adopt them,
So-
adopt the direction.
And then just a quick one on I forgot to ask the team over there because my notes were on my thingy. But the commercial chemicals and everything, that's one thing in the budget. What I wanted to check whether or not we're still right with that figure, because those chemicals have gone up quite significantly over the last year or two, haven't they?
Yes.
Yep.
I'll just add two things. If there are particular questions, for example, the chemicals and just confirming things, more than happy that you give us those questions and then we can bring them back at that wrap-up session or email them out to you and things like that as well. So, yeah, make this a very flexible working space.
But I think, Nahui, the answer to your question is probably yes, from my personal experience. And the nodding of heads in the back of the room. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, through the chair, just we'll just acknowledge that swimming pools are never a profit-making exercise, and they're basically a drain on any council, probably like just equivalent to public transport, really. But I just want to support and endorse Councillor Greenslade's request for subsidised youth swimming at Turangi, and if we want to talk about figures and what sort of numbers we're talking about, I believe this, if I recall correctly, it was this question was asked, how much does this cost? And I think the audio, if we gave under 16s free entry to Turangi, if I recall correctly, the number was about $20,000 to $30,000 per year. I mean, it's 30,000. It's nothing, honestly, and. I mean, one could argue that, oh, well, if you give it to them, why shouldn't you give it to everyone else? But I think Councillor Greenslade gave a pretty good argument that they don't have a lake they can just go and jump into, and absolutely endorse it. If it's a targeted rate to Turangi, so be it.
Councillor Medanui.
Yep, just I think all of our pools are a pretty amazing asset for our district. Really hard to find some wins like all of these topics, but there's alongside the service level piece, I think there's an important wellbeing piece for all three areas. I think there is a little bit of room, as per Rachel's comment, around the user pay piece. Can we nudge that as an example here in town? But when you look alongside the different needs, certainly with what Manga Keno's doing, Sandra mentioned Turangi, other end of the scale, and is that the opportunity? I'd be interested to see what the user pay rate idea looks like in those specific areas. Are there any, once again supporting Sandra, the commercial opportunities from some of our big energy companies, especially, that's sort of a big topic, but there's some intricacies amongst the three different areas, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. In the interest of time, we'll move to the next, which is strategic property. Again, there's a mix of satisfaction of the community. It's sort of neutral there, and there's a degree of importance there, particularly reflecting our opportunities here financially, I suppose. Most of the dots seem to be towards the bottom, which is sort of a big review. What specifically would you like to target with that review? That would be useful to know.
I don't mind starting. Your Worship, is that all right? I would very much like to look at the policy settings around the strategic property reserves. Right now, I think we can only use profits to reinvest in property. I would like to be able to look at that policy to give ourselves options on how we use the revenue from that. It might be for community projects, it might be to pay down debt. But right now that policy prevents us from doing that, so I think the first step would be to look at creating options in our policy settings.
Any other comments?
Yes, Your Worship. I having a conversation with Sarah, talking about making sure that we actually preserve the funds if we do sell, that the funds are then reserved and kept elsewhere in case or in time when we need to invest in other areas. Just paying off debt full stop and not preserving the funds. Just keeping in mind that nobody's making any more land. The land we've got is the land we've got, and once it's gone, it's gone.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, through the chair, it's my concerted impression that we have a lot of land in this district that we could be and should be shedding, and that's pretty straightforward. Let's do it. Let's do it properly and seriously, not just talk about it.
Okay, if
Any
there's
other
nothing further.
questions or comments?
All right, we'll move on to our next bunch, which are housing for the elderly. Over here, we'll have the four go housing for the elderly first, and waste and environmental management at the back. If you three would head that way. All right, and we'll roughly same time frames. Thank you.
Can all the councillors return to their seats so we can carry on? Can I just start by saying, I think this whole exercise is to try and look at ways at which we can reduce the rates cost. So we need to bear that in mind when we're making our decisions. Anyone want to comment on that? Please carry on. Hope, are you back online there?
Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Right.
And just to make a comment to what you've just said there, yeah, we certainly need to look at ways that we can reduce rates. Although I did notice in my answers that there is want for more services. So I guess that's a challenge we'll have to face.
Okay, housing for the elderly. Again, we'll do a quick discussion and wrap up and see if we can confirm what this direction seems to be. And that seems to be one where we don't think we're doing a particularly good service and low importance to the community, maybe reflecting that we've got a reasonably small stock of these relative to the need and relative to what others might be able to do, I think. And then there seems to be a strong consensus there around a major review of this, and some of the comments there around, I think, CHIPS or other people who can access government funding, being able to provide wraparound services, invest more and generally provide better services. Is that the view? Open to the floor, thanks.
Largely, yes. I mean, these are vulnerable people. We don't obviously want to displace them, but we do have to look at some pretty tough options as well, just to be able to look at some comparisons. So I think we should be looking at what we're charging in rental. I think we should look at CHIPS and what they can provide, and I think we should look at what options we've got to utilise that land holding better. It might be that we grandfather people out, or there's lots of ways that we can look at reducing the costs there and what is best for our vulnerable people, and I'd like to investigate as much of that as we can, just so that we've got some comparisons.
Oh, through the chair, yes, absolutely, just agree with that, and this seems to fall squarely within the rationalising assets exercise that is being motivated by the rates caps. So yeah, that's actually, we talked about this a couple of years ago, and I remember we just went around in circles and didn't really decide anything. So let's see if we can make some decisions this time.
And I'm just going to note too, because I looked at the bandwidth on that one as to rates and rate funding and tenants, and we're looking at, I think, a 60-40 split there. 60% comes from rates, and 40% comes from rent. So our community are funding 60% of that. And we have to consider whether that's right, whether that's a setting that we're happy with. And then I'd like to look at all of those options, what it would look like if we were to grandfather tenants out and sell, what it looks like to get a chip involved, and in the meantime, do we need to look at the rental?
Any further comments before we move to the next area? All right, the next one is waste and environmental management. There's a bit of a split there between status quo and review to try and find cost savings. I know there weren't a lot of options put forward for this one because we're reasonably lean, and a mixture of importance and satisfaction with the community there. Largely important, some dissatisfaction potentially with prices, I know was some of the discussion, but I'll leave it to the table to discuss.
Through the chair.
Sorry, Councillor, go ahead.
Thank you. Having lived in an environment for many years that was very recycling focused, one of the things that I've noticed this is not particularly for the Taupō district, it's New Zealand, we are not recycling focused in this country, and people tend to just put all their stuff straight into the rubbish bin, and it disappears out of their mind and out of their life, and it becomes our responsibility. That sort of thing we know starts in the schools. It starts with education of children and in classrooms. It starts at a very early age, and so that, you know, it takes a few years to feed through. But I know that we do lots of education, but somehow or another it's just not getting through. We need to be much more focused on that education role of making sure that anything that can be taken out of the rubbish, the fill area, is taken out of it. And I know the waste minimisation officer was saying looking for more opportunities to recycle, but if people are not going to actually put those things forward for recycling, then, you know, what do we do? So we've got the challenge of changing people's mentality in this district. Everybody should have a compost bin in their backyard. It should be should be mandatory. You know, you shouldn't be putting food waste into your. Nobody should be putting food waste into their rubbish. You know, for two reasons. First of all, it shouldn't be going into rubbish, and secondly, you know, it's environmental when we've got dogs and things. And I know Councillor Shepherd, or she was once upon a time, is now Councillor Cameron. You know, is very focused on this in her world, and, you know, doing a lot in her environment. And in Turangi, we've got a lot of people working in that space, but somehow or another, yeah, you know, marks out of 10, it's about 3, I think. And I think we need to do a heck of a lot better in the district, and that's a responsibility that needs to go back onto our ratepayers. And I'm sorry, it's a growl. It's not a growl at our staff, it's a growl at our community.
I'm just going to take a minute to recognise the team who are looking after our landfill, because I think if you compare our pricing to other councils, we are super cheap. It's apparently cheaper to load your trailer in Whakatane, drive all the way to Taupō, dump your rubbish at the Taupō landfill, and drive all the way back to Whakatane. So alongside the education of reducing waste, minimising waste, which I think is important, I think we also need to let our community know that we're doing everything we possibly can to keep this as reasonable as we can, but we actually need them to help us out as well. So I do believe there's an education piece. I do. And I don't see how we can cut back anywhere, because as soon as you start putting the fees and charges up, that undermines all the work that Brent's done to get the subsidies from the commercial element of this. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and it really does just come down to a bit of education and keep doing what you're doing.
Councillor Steve.
Yeah, just agree with Rachel. I think, and possibly there's an engagement or comms piece for the community that we're pretty lucky, I feel, just with what we currently have, alongside plans to maintain some sustainability, I guess, with the current option. Yeah.
Hui.
Yeah, with the picking up everybody else's things on the education, we do need to make sure that education is focused at the right level, because our schools are actually doing a really good job right now, or at least our local ones, I believe, are. It's that in between generations that didn't really see benefit in and have never been brought up recycling tend to be the issue. So how somebody can magically get through to this generation that are causing the issue, good luck.
Does anyone know what the land tip fee at Whakatane is, if it's cheaper to come here?
Look, we did some analysis going back in the last LTP. I'm looking at, there's Brent. Looking at fees and charges, and I suggest that perhaps is something that we bring back to the table as part of the LTP process. I know when we compared it, and I'm looking at someone around the room, there we go. Thank you. Sarah did some analysis around the country. We can find that analysis again, Sarah, and share it with the councillors.
And through the chair, if it's all right, we do have the government waste levies plonked on top of us as well. I think some government settings are not helping the situation. So I don't know. There's an advocacy piece there too, perhaps.
Thank you.
Just want to ask a question, Your Worship. Brent, how did you get on with the building waste that you were advocating for? Did that ever go anywhere?
So, through you, Chair, our building. Can you just step up to the microphone?
Yeah.
The building waste solution is something we're going to look at our new transfer station. So the current process for commercial construction demolition trucks is to drive to the tip head and tip it off and not get sorted. So the idea is to put that through this new facility, and that new facility will have space on the ground for those to be dumped up and sorted through and reduced that way. Yeah.
Thank you, because I know you were very worried about that. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Oh, never mind.
Go ahead, Duncan.
Oh, through the chair, yeah, I was just going to ask, I mean, I've been asked numerous times about why doesn't Taupo consider incineration going down that avenue? Can we...
Okay, so the cost of an incinerator is probably around the $50 million mark. You would have to make sure that, like any business, that you've got that have got people that want to come in the door to provide you with that waste. So initially you would have to make sure you've got thousands and thousands of tonnes of waste contracted before you spent the 50 million, and if you haven't, then no one's coming, and therefore you would end up in a pretty drastic financial hole pretty quickly. I think if anything's going to happen in that space, it's going to be from the commercial market, who are better placed to take that sort of risk. Yeah.
I've just Googled how much does a landfill waste incinerator cost, and I've got a cost typically ranging from 190 million to over 1.2 billion. Wow.
Well, I imagine it wouldn't be down to little old Taupō District Council to do it, but conceivably a bunch of, if councils are going to do it, could get together and do it. I imagine if they were going to do it at all, but you're saying you're suggesting a commercial operator might be the way it's going to happen, if it's going to happen at all. Like a place like Auckland could invest in it and do it. They haven't though. Has anyone in the country?
Tio Mamuto investigated, and I talked to a councillor at Local Government New Zealand, and she said that it was going to mean that they were actually going to be importing, maybe not outside the country, but importing into the area more waste than they could ever produce themselves, even in their surrounding district, taking us into account. And they gave it away in the end because the returns were just not really appropriate actually for anyone in New Zealand.
And the damage to the environment.
Yeah, well, yeah, no.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I think there's a significant amount of snake oil salesmen out there trying to convince people to invest in this. The central government have softened their stance around waste energy, of course, but it's a linear process where you're just going to make and burn, as opposed to our philosophy around waste is to make, repurpose, remake, and from a circular economy perspective. So. I think watch this space. We're going to run out of landfill space, and then at some stage in New Zealand we need to do something. Maybe this a solution, but it probably won't be coming from local government, I suspect.
Just as an aside, I did happen to be scrolling Facebook recently, and I see Rotorua have shut their landfill and all of their waste is now being trucked out, and they were letting their community know that pricing was going up even further, because that's already a very expensive option.
Might be a driver, Councillor Greenslade, to push the recycling.
there is a repair cafe at the Venture Centre on Saturday for anyone who's interested.
Of course, I'm sorry I overlooked that fact.
Through the chair, can I just ask, make a comment there?
Go ahead, Hope.
Thank you. So just on that recycling note, we could look at, trying to encourage more recycling through incentives, getting people to bring in their recycling, and we offer them a discounted thing on anything that they may need, or even rates.
But effectively, that's what happens. If you go to the dump and recycle, you take the recycling off first, and you only get charged for the waste that is put into across the weighbridge and into the dump pit.
Right.
Through the chair, just to quickly answer your question that was raised around the pricing. Whakatane is $313 per tonne. Taupō District Council is $280 per tonne. And at $280 per tonne, we are one of the cheaper councils in the country. Those other councils that have to truck out elsewhere, Gisborne was one of the ones we looked at last time, for example, who has to truck quite a significant distance, and they're in excess of $400 per tonne for general waste.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap up and come to a close there, unless there's anything final. We've now done 10 out of the 23 activities we're going to look at through this. It's an opportunity time to do a bit of a wrap up and see which ones we've identified for review, but we'll do that maybe next time. There's 2 sessions next week. It's a busy program to get through, but by the end of the month we'll be there mostly. So thank you for today. We've reviewed the feedback from last time, and it is really useful. It is a good direction for staff, so this has been a good process. Thank you for your input. That's it from me.
Nope, that's it from me too. Just honestly, if there's any questions, just please feel free to email us, and we will try and get that information sorted. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the work you've put in and bringing this to us. It is important. Can we do the closing karakia? Thank you for that, everyone. We'll now break for our lunch break before we resume for those that are going to Taupo Waters at 1 p.m.